When AC should be sent. I gave this disclaimer last debate and it didn't end up being a problem, but the Wi-Fi in my region is being weird today, so I don't have Ethernet access, just normal Wi-Fi. So if it cuts out during the 1AC, like, that's why. But like Isaac saw me get through this 1AC last, like, trust that I did, I guess. Does everybody have the 1AC? Okay.
Wait, Ozzy, give me 1 sec.
Okay.
I haven't received it.
I put you on it.
Oh, you sent it to my other email. That works.
Okay.
Just give me 1 sec because I have to download it.
Yeah, let me know when you're good. Has it downloaded or no?
I'm good now.
Okay. I'm going to start in about 10 or so seconds unless somebody verbally objects. Contention 1 is emissions anthropogenic and accelerating towards catastrophe, criminalization of corporate perpetrators is key to effective mitigation. That's why if you think criminalization to turn attention to political structure that fosters climate change is real and escalating due to anthropogenic causes of changes that are present in the atmosphere and ocean, or the amount of ice that emits sea levels, recent greenhouse gases by increased scientific data demonstrate the scale of the problem fell in the form of extreme weather events, competition, opportunity disease for the distinction, intense social conflict, corporate activity has been interpreted as the ecocide. The urgency for this to be recognized as requirements by highlighted by inadequately responded by governments. Climate change is rapidly altering world ecology. A little action to be taken by states to rein in the worst contributors. Fossil fuel corporations are directly responsible for extreme ecological disasters. They make up 3/4 of overall emissions. That's are enough. In 1900, fossil fuel producers are responsible for 71% of emissions. It was to try fossil fuel executive could channel ratio that climbs 1% the death toll up into the hundreds of millions caught in the past, already costing 400,000 deaths for your county casualties due to burning fossil fuels, pollution, smoke, occupational hazards. Jumps at 5 million a year. All costs of the fossil fuel industry. We need to share fossil fuels. That's what it will take to avert catastrophic climate impacts. Barring major executives who are responsible for suffering people of color, residents of the global south. It's not too late. Emissions reduction can stop tail end risk. That's done in 20. Limiting warming to below 2 degrees Celsius can delay the data exposure by up to 6 decades, which are so very clearly it's not too late to act. The benefits acting now. We massively fit ecosystem can hinge on the world taking immediate action. Will continue high emissions, loss of biodiversity, disruption in ecosystems are likely to happen within the next few decades. Limiting warming below 2 degrees Celsius could delay the time in ecosystems of period experience abrupt exposure by 6 decades. We are so very clearly it's not too late to act. We massively accumulate over time. We can effectively flatten the curve. We can mitigate many of these impacts rapidly. Reducing carbon emissions. Emissions is key. Successful international mitigation that fits 16. The rest of the world needs the U.S. to litigate on cutting carbon pollution for China, India, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. Without the U.S.'s successful global response will be possible. No one will cooperate unless the world's religious emitter gets to the human must demonstrate that we can reduce our emissions. China is already investing in clean energy, but its for a technological revolution is strongly known from the U.S. and matters to Beijing is a clear signal passing the climate, but would go a long way. India and other countries cannot make enough of a difference unless there's strong leadership from the largest economy. Warming causes widespread societal disruption that cumulatively poses an existential risk. That's Korea 18. Climate change and ocean acidification puts existential risk because the feedback loops at times is surprised and connected to food and water shortage, care, harm, and flooding can overwhelm to extreme nations of vulnerable diseases, acidification, interfere with society with a hard time responding to rare events. Humans have adapted through history. However, today's crises are long time delays. The consequence of the absence of urgency in the climate system is right for positive feedback loops that can catch many of credit produce applicative everyone way climate change takes zero responsibility of undiscovered fear, pretend even greater existential risk that outweighs its utmost moral evil. Disavowal of the risk makes it more likely that spurns and 17 extinction prevent existence is good for people who exist in extinction to provide people with these for billions who never get an opportunity. Billions of people without painful deaths. There will be no future generation. The value of all these generations together greatly exceeds the value of the current generation. Future life being prevented, and we only lost it. No, the only form of intelligence, like humans' capacity for rationality is valuable enough. Self-existing people would endure physical pain and painful premature death. Rejected principle one feels to show rejects respect to a person as a rational agent killed without their consent. Interests have not been taken into account. These people can endure non-physical harms that could be faced for psychological effects by no means universal sense of hopelessness, despair, though over humans in their project ends with these psychological harm and reason. Rejected principle that permitted human extinction and emissions disproportionately impact vulnerable and marginalized populations, causes hunger, disease and increased physiological violence. That's market 19 emissions are causing future deaths, reduced food and water wells. That's 300 disease, violence, and migration. Present incidents may be biased. Future premature death is causing 1,000 tons of carbon, fossil fuel pressure, and directly killing thousands of disease pollution. Vulnerable population due streams of other disease and compromising food, water, and clean air without a great portion occurring in vulnerable countries. The failure of rich corporations, racism, the sense of protagonists are mainly white and victims are mainly black. That also be considered sexist, giving gender difference and effects on health and life expectancy. Rising seas within cities, alienation will short farming, drought, loss of water, storms, causing floods, and epidemics. Heat waves will become intense. Species extinction will continue. Increase risk of runaway, AGW to refine natural positive feedback that are not canceled when ice melts, seas reflecting the carbon content increases their ability to receive CO2 falls from permafrost starts and releases CO2, raising the threat level is important. Key disparate individual and institutional action. That's 12 minutes 12. Apocalypse system goes with actives and the group perceived the risk to be the greatest described climate change apocalyptic language alarmists to seem more likely have taken personal action to reduce emissions and the responded to perceive climate change possess that the alarm to making changes or unless to support aggressive nationals respond those who think environmental problems pose a severe threat practice activism rather than keeping way to fatalistic resignation. I believe the beliefs also motivate lobbying, public information campaigns, teachers, legislative priorities, narrativization is essential for messages to be persuasive stories encourage action in the world even if they invoke an imaginary one with the narrative context and being adaptive decision be merely matters of convenience. Even the most extreme forms of securitization don't result in militaristic action that's key. And 13 rivals united, let's say, face a combat threat. We now have to win our search for a global threat. We have created one in the form of hotter temperatures, rising sea levels, and increasing unpredictable weather. Just hearing about the dangers posed by global warming continue to pacifist comment fear of the danger that climate change, global cooperation. When you think yourself as straight as facing a shared enemy, it brings people together. Thus, the plan the United States federal government should ask substantial criminal justice for what defines use, import, and export of fossil fuels by corporations or government says a carbon strict liability imposes a penalty on corporate and government emitters, importers, and exporters of 50 million per 1 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Contention to solvency prosecution via criminal penalties punishes violators and deters future polluters. That's found greenhouse. Any team vast consequences of environmental crimes authorized governments in the force future changes intensifying the repercussions of perpetuating environmental crimes that likely to deter individuals and businesses from hurting the environment. Corporations are forced to pay lower sum because emission businesses who may have properly faced with massive fines are less likely to activate enforcement more stringent fines can increase to 50 million per 1 million metric tons of GHG. No circumvention deterrence works for corporations. That's Rousseau. 17 comments or prosecution enforces compliance with the law by investigating cases responsible for criminal conduct opposing the threat to the environmental law violation and classified as a white collar crime. The cell is a government investigation of corporations fines are being imposed to negate profits made for engaging in illegal activities. Criminal enforcement is known to have a more significant deterrent effect than civil actions and negative persons in the harm reputation maybe carries situation of corporation criminal commission hinders capacity but on future government contract liability standard is key. It legally requires disinvestment from fossil fuel assets, prevents circumvention, ensures deterrent. 11. The argument of favor strict liability centers on the gravity of environmental beliefs that polluting industry must be put to end, requiring knowledge, receipt, avoidance, and culpabilities, exceed, and deny environmental disaster. Strict liability would establish unequivocal prohibition of harm the magnitude of offense in the absence of measure. Equally important to serve as a deterrent and deterrent change minds with strict liability proceedings would be lesser in the success of things short of a short regulatory cycle create change that change would be prospect of criminal prosecution, large scale flow of financial resources into green tech would be facilitation. Companies fail to respond punitive legal proceedings would be forthcoming. Prohibitedly punishing fossil fuel producers solves warning. It's an important imposition of progressive governmentality that's impossible for anti-state alternatives to capture this fronty. 15 capitalists have to see people turn to each other for money. They say anti-state, the sin is not just prisons from the military, also the APA when the left embraces fantasies and being outside the government and the market cuts off itself from reporting resources. That should be thinking about ways it can leverage government utility and government to prevent Vermont during Hurricane Irene as we enter be where existing institutional mechanisms with which we can control and control capital environmental issues should be forcing laws. They have the power to say anti-state ethos within the environmental movement and romanticization of the local doesn't recognize the global political economy where citizens cities is ridiculous. The fossil fuel economies industry is the most powerful force the world has ever seen. The state has a lot to we need to fight about the fossil fuel companies. We should use the government to less the astronomical fines on fossil fuel companies for pollution. Speculation about both the consequence of climate change as well as currently unlikely but possible future scenarios for responding to it is the most effective pedagogical approach to teaching and organizing about climate change. That's all. Everything imagining the future with a change climate is one way of fostering students that understanding of climate change to describe the sheer magnitude of the changes exercises and can also link specific outcomes of climate change to the process that are producing the results of you can imagine the potential ramifications of climate change to present these consequences and possible to construct a world based on the students understanding of climate change students creatively construct potential future produces pedagogical benefits to the dominant speculation and practice of the speculation to constrain the future further speculation on the other hand concerning uncertainty must not be reduced to manageable study the firm speculation less than the potential open a future that we can do how we act in the present radical experimentation with the future different from the here and now if we accept that adapting climate change requires imagined new solutions that break from carbon intensive to open the fossil future will gain proficiency in explaining the boundaries that we set to furnish adaptation to climate change. Rule experimentation should orient those politics as commonly and 13 rule experimentation can disrupt and redirect authority habit institutional regularity encourage others to look more closely at their own performance and should severe risk and set the stage for large scale action and consolation of students form study groups to explore a set of practices to contribute to the fragility things students may post on timely questions and activities can empowerment to experiment with other role performance and once you enter professional life if you may rethink and adjust your practice to challenge corporations of how the environment adopted this experience requires to participate in more adventurous activities minor moments can also settle habits and perception they can extend the time horizon within which we think and act. Now is the time to join others and make new role experiments to generate energy to enter and new modes of role experimentation the shaky perceptions if you started these experiments that becomes more refined as we can for corporate managers officials, university officials, and neighborhood leaders to become more alert to institutional purpose that propel constituencies forward. Give me a second to sit down and I'll be good. I'm good.
Sorry, just give me 1 sec. I'll start. Ooh. Okay. 2 minutes. I want to start on this Parenti an Emmanuel card. From article is titled "Climate Change, Militarism, Neoliberalism in the State." It's about how we need to be anti-capitalist. Then let's move up to the advantage. You've read this Spitz piece of evidence that says there needs to be a race to clean tech. Why do you think Parenti is offense for you?
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. The Parenti card, you should read it. It explicitly says that in order to be anti-capitalist, we need to leverage astronomical.
Well, yeah, but the one I see has said cap
companies.
good.
The one I see has said cap good in this instance. Like Parenti is very explicitly a defense of this. I don't know what you're laughing about. Like,
you think Parenti says cap good in this instance?
I think Parenti says that in the context of warming, we need to utilize the state.
Okay, yeah,
which is what the
it says
advantage
we need to
says.
Utilize the state against the sort of neoliberal.
Yeah, that's what we do because we force corporations and governments to stop emitting.
Says, quote, "The rest of the world needs the U.S. to lead on cutting carbon pollution to jumpstart a clean energy race." Where
obviously the alternative to fossil fuel is clean energy. Like I literally have no idea what you're talking about. What else, Arnold?
Okay, we'll move on. Next question I have is about this Keating card. This one, it just says like, actually the question I have is, it says, when you think of yourself as facing a shared enemy, it brings people together. What is the shared enemy?
Global warming.
Global warming.
The common fear of the dangers of climate change lead to global cooperation.
Okay. The specific question actually we'll move on. The Dunn card says limiting global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius could delay the date of exposure by up to 6 decades. What about 2 degrees Celsius delays the date of exposure?
I think the argument is that 2 degrees Celsius is what like scientific consensus has concluded. Like, that's why.
Okay, I'm specifically asking about the date of exposure stuff.
I think that's just a fancy way to say the effects of warming.
The effects.
I think that's just
okay.
I think that's just a fancy way to say.
Okay, good. The last question I have is about this Hall card. It says the affirmative. It says there's a distinction between affirmative speculation and affirmative speculation. Affirmative speculation functions concerning uncertainty, and it says we must open up new futures that are different from the here and now. It also says, quote, by asserting that the unthinkable is always... Okay. Never mind.
Okay.
The 1 in C is sent. The order is 1 off in case.
Is there an order in case?
Just on the advantage. Does everyone have the dog? Okay, is anyone not ready? Stabilization of emissions fixes solutions to the climate crisis into an unproven technocratic frame rely on an impossible fantasy of homeostasis. The religious ideal of resiliency must be questioned ethically rather than technically. Walk of 10. Economic optimal efficient work to reducing emissions and habits by model assuming a reasonable limit calculating for all concerns needs to guide policy action to be a fixed target method and the assumption of future resource availability and energy efficiency. Cost benefit analysis not provide simple answer because then it requires high yet cost benefit analysis. Is there a technocratic agenda focused on emission control? The difference the question about ethical analysis framed by benefits for uncertain interpretation must be better than trying to solve the personal ultimate level of change. Climate stabilization of appealing because the promise of reward action taken now the quasi-religious ideal stability holds to discover radical tabulation and imagine future secure stable while by accident the stable living makes it reflect a project of bringing order to existing coalition but it doesn't either or approach I also calling common stabilization during well even though there are many questions about their framing of the problem and accuracy of the figures and the implication for management assessment frame could consider alternative frames not currently in political debates common stabilization of framing concept of intentional static qualification of equilibrium rather than diamond goals to decarbonizing energy system focusing on scientific answer the question of climate policy might be need broader engagement with the research community benefit focus on stabilization and reflexivity the accepted theme of stabilization policy framework something that should be a question long term open engagement rather than the types of scientific targets that as though we should no, we either could or should stand together and command change of variability, see the level of stabilization, target begins intensity, political and ethical questioning, which is the conception of state dangerous and tolerable. It takes some rational basis by which certain impacts are liable. Mitigation cannot be seen as technology to stabilize the climate, rather seen as active and heavily politicized intervention. Critical ethical dilemmas are obscured to the ethical capability, climate stabilization policies, and the process of organizing political ends to protect the environment re-entrenches human mastery, turning the case into through a failed loop of attempts to quelling excess. Bomb in 15. Mimetic parties to create violence or the natural order of the world becomes a standing reserve to create the orderly world of capital. Human reason created vicious cycle domination perpetuated by rational society. The nominee the emerging phenomena of the reason becomes the domination of the natural world. Every relative refusal or murdering embeddedness to the human exceptionalism. Nature becomes the ultimate escape. That logic is sacrifice. Mastery sacrifice. Sacrifice. Prepared the Western imagination between nature and reserve. The logical domination. Scientific attempts to make the human exceptional participate. The reason imposed the logical order in the planet in case of science and human may be relation of violence. Modernity machines that deliver company that into humanity becomes an American member access be understood conversation all environmental disaster we have to kind of fix our society whose order domination opposes human desire value and the natural life nature everything in terror and rising and the chaos of rising planetary research will escape and lead to protection and make research message in the self project and also external world there was literally fear the other attempt to master dominating we need ritual that openness to pay for medical to those alternative the idea that kind of peace is at least ecological violence and they affirm it conceives the world as laboratory amenable to human calculation climate change thus presents itself as an opportunity for increased ecological surveillance but this forgets that policy approaches to act to exacerbate climate change, not reduce it. Go ahead. And Randall's 9. Rational habit, please move down the climate stabilization policy formation of the promise of back from the ideal temperature target, the mission prefer sensitivity and cycle limits being open, the policy approach with such a temperature to the precautionary act to cast the risk and uncertainty, climate policy with answer for the control cycling because for the monetary international protocols and the world of collaborative and intelligent targeted surveillance to be partially determined which I think are that kind of focus on with the possibility annihilation may be another institutional preparation, imagining the pretty sensitive concerns of policymakers, decision of thinking critically, not accidental and irrational subject for the animal but rather always owing effective subject climate change events offer market opportunity for financial products that have catastrophic ones and the imagination for disaster use system profit from pursuing finding future climate adequacy opportunity related by using crisis to keep market value of climate change policy bringing in the very big reality states over the imagination of apocalypse. We put a state limit depends on other policies and legitimate positions. Governments are anticipating the worst after the ways that increase the possibility of the occurrence of precautionary action may bring about severe climatic consequences rather than prevent them. Solution climate change become a justified precautionary measure engaging in the understanding in launching policies about climate correct and the on climate change resulting in instant climate change is likely to be high. And instead of instrumentally manipulating countries to arrive at the decision to reduce emissions through calculated logic, we should create a radical break from logic moving towards an ethos of dwelling. Bring terminal in 16. And what is with the person normative and not present utilitarian concerns consider how we come to be in home in the world and how we use to stand relations with their human beings to without conscious and mental thinking people drive them down deliberate patterns of habits awareness only occurs different moment for providing anxiety powers to understand that we're holding on rooms phyllis and hydrogen ethers in either the order in practice of the comportment action beyond the choice and decision goes on by something observed with their the function to office of the resisting influence of embeddedness to think about allowing a unique thing to sit on the terms that in orientation of daily life need to be a second nature of the everyone and the attitude and mastery environment to provide the world's picture right this preoccupation investing business care for environmentalism and to measure dominates with the way and it's also diversity impossible to be listening to but quantifying impact and more with avoiding destruction releasing that causing impact was engage NGOs institutions only seek to grips and speak to ideas of those ethers is not offer a clear normative alternative precisely not it does articulate consideration the response to emergence we may study alternate forms to organize instrumental prolific loops and other possibility delivery democracy as a response that may after this extent and then no points at a stakeholder table was going to be here the climate change the destruction of fire activity just on power for passion right to live with the test and every individual note and that's a relational network open to experiencing is family and ontologic understands the entity structure and intelligibility of all knowledge claims and self-perpetuate their own truth in every sector of science. Prior question is critical reinterpretation of education it feeds itself from the ontotheological mandate towards optimization of efficiency. Thompson 5 understanding of the running the history of being ready to understanding what is a metaphysical time and piece of ontological functions like self-fulfilling process theory shaping intelligence and understanding that education made possible the history of being a metaphysical automation of concept frame leaders that transform all being to the very start of the like intrinsic be organized afterwards into maximal and framing generate is a calculative thinking which touch on my discovery all calculative relations and limited quantification of talk about the additional numerical calculative framing tends to reduce all entity And program information when increasing interstate circulation, not being the world is sent by knowledge we pursue uncover nobody. We cannot help it. We know we're providing medical to go universal to share global social the endeavor to guide creating a community on disciples. Dismissal are able to produce instrumentally useful and indicative services to present themselves in terms of their use. Just adopt this instrumental mentality to see education to increase salary and the right recommendation leads professionalization of the university deterioration, vocational or university becoming excellent bureaucratic corporation, given their idea to maximize self-perpetuation. Matter this accommodation leads to the future in which is future of the university and hope for nothing more than a pragmatic situational resulting in environmental increasing transformed by the logic of consumerism. Next case, blackouts during the act doesn't do anything to change the structure of electricity generation, making fossil fuel generation astronomically expensive will merely skyrocket electricity prices and exacerbate environmental racism in Texas. Was 224. The difference between the oil and gas operations far part of energy system fails to meet the color change and when the base competitive electricity system in the wild was marketed to operate only short-term purposes. People who display the blackouts are blackout representation is something that just need to shut off stress, and it's impulsive to power Texas about fossil fuels. We're years away from battery storage. Letterman 217. When it's only dependent on the limited Texas places of the U.S. electricity infrastructure might be fully prepared to receive spikes in demand for power. The challenges like deeper in the U.S. relies on more when the power related cited the U.S. will have to develop vast supplies of gigantic battery charges. So far as money and doesn't solve environmental criminalization. Fails. Johnson 20. Logical overproduction evidence. The difference of police in change for reasons to criminal prosecution. The UK increase the targeting individual one place for criminal prosecution by the corporation. Environmental crime prosecution increasing frequency over time. Later in the executive represented declining share the criminal defense where those level points are increasingly charged, and countries would only shift to production to other countries. No solvency purchase and started 17. And we're directly possibly make it first solution intensive production towards the country like relation with the countries against climate change with their own to the competitive disadvantage. And Russo says over deterrence, the part where they put in a small font says tons of appearance and reasons it fails. Countries would just officer and said even if there's a prosecution, it results in a plea deal. Coppell reads screen when I say Russo 17. And 1988 countries detected full enforcement 30 upon direction of environmental crimes over the 30 cases are used on the plea agreement over the prosecution fights over deterrence and departs the criminal distinction of their motor segment of history of environmental criminal law. Americans not seriously addressing impact of environmental pollution and violation. Actually, Congress and countries assessing effective foreign aid, utilizing creation of corporate free agreements of trusting domestic international mental to wildlife crimes, free from community service, of course, also rejected defense or copy of few defenses that have a to be effective or the law to the legal rights and not complete persuasive defense. And U.S. climate leadership is shattered. Zero modeling. For 19 major such influence by domestic policy driving emission that all go right into very focused efforts to teach to propose a codified new requirements of fully moving design legal chances as humanity in the US 50% emission would enough to keep warning inject other countries increasing their ranking to meet the US is a very inward looking conservative. We don't think that the US is a leader on climate. I don't think anyone thinks that way. And their drive. Okay, I didn't read the Ho and Boyer evidence.
Okay, are you good?
Yes.
Can you explain the alternative to me?
Yeah, so the Pinter and Moreland evidence, it talks about dwelling. So it links turns the AF's apocalyptic framing. Instead of viewing ourselves as things that are safe just because we met that 2-degree threshold or technocratic management, we should instead move towards an affective understanding as a mode of engaging with institutions. Our argument is that people are not individualized entities.
How do we engage with institutions post-AF, and what does the alt do post-alt, and what does the alt do to like combat warming?
It's not that people are not individualized entities, rather are collective in their nature, and that is why calculations are counterproductive for motivating action. Instead, we move towards
I understand all of this.
Argument is one of starting points, not of sort of the end goal. We've critiqued that sort of framing.
I understand that, but can you give me like this is all very abstract to me. Can you give me some
that's kind of our point. The idea that we
can
move towards quick fix solutions to the climate crisis, exactly what we've critiqued. The idea that we
so
have
the alt does not
here.
claim to do any direct path to resolve warming, right?
Well,
that's not true.
We forward a different mode of engaging with.
Well, then what is that path?
Instead of starting with the calculations like that 2-degree threshold, we forward and.
Okay, so we think because we don't know yet. That's okay.
Our whole point is that the climate crisis is impossible to resolve when you constantly question what exactly do you do in this instance. Our whole point is that we must understand the priors to get there.
Then how do we know what to do? That's okay.
In this instance.
That's fine. I want to move on.
We're not saying we don't do
anything. I want to move on. First link card says, quote, the puzzle of the optimal level of climate change when analysis is framed by benefits versus potential GDP costs and risks. It's about stuff like geoengineering that tries to stop warming while we're emitting. The AF just stops emissions forefront.
Using quantitative metrics to determine when we have solved for climate change, because the climate catastrophe exceeds rational utility for marginalized individuals, which is why our argument is that focus on what is politically possible now. We need to work within working within existing institutions is bad. Instead, we mobilize a political response that moves away from the status quo conceptions of how to engage those institutions.
Also, you might be right that there's certain parts of the app that agree, but this app is a mess of different solutions to the climate crisis with zero unified explanation. So So if we
Look,
want to link
this
to
is
one
not
of them,
this is
it
not an
turns the rest of
argument.
the
These
app.
are just like assertions. Can you list the links for me then?
Yeah, sure. So that link will be to your done evidence that describes how you've understood the climate crisis. When you see
Okay.
cross-checks, when I asked about this card, you said the date
You
of
don't
exposure is
need to
about the
explain
effects
them.
of
I just
warming.
want the list, Arnav.
Okay, there's
I
that
got done
link.
2 degrees Celsius.
Bauman
Fine.
evidence is to your Keating evidence about international rivalry. We have
Okay.
a link to international law to your Spitz evidence.
Uh-huh.
We have like the extinction type link.
Okay.
And yeah, I think
Are
that's it.
any of these links to the material action of the plan?
Well, we think your framing of when you reach that solvency through your material action is bad.
Yeah, also
We
the
didn't do that.
iLaw link probably is.
I can't hear you.
Do we mind if I take a little bit of prep time? All of my documents just froze and they're crashing.
Stop prep.
Yeah, sorry. Let me try and
Tech
figure this
time?
out.
Not prep time, tech time.
Yeah.
All right, we'll start tech time.
Okay, cool.
I got confused. I was like, "Whoa, we're starting prep for that?"
No, my
I was
bad.
like, were we not taking prep?
I think it worked. It just closed out all of my documents. I need to open it up. Okay, I think we're good now. Sorry about that. I'll continue prep. I think it was at 8:17. Okay, I'll send it out.
Drew, how much should we have left?
I just put it in chat.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. It's case K and yeah. It should be sent. Just give me a thumbs up or something when you have the doc. Okay, I'm gonna start in about 10 sec. Okay, Coppell's not ready. My bad.
Yeah, I haven't got.
My bad.
Oh, right. It's my other email. Give me a sec. That's why.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Arnav, we're gonna start making you take tech time for that. Yeah.
Stop. Okay. I have it now. I'm ready to go whenever.
Cool. Same thing. Gonna start in about 10 seconds if no one objects. One because decisions, loss mitigation, adaptations, runaway missions, rather sea levels, goodbye diversity, and I predict activity ensures and this people loops because decisions that's currently externally missions to the next big hunger disease and physiological bonds upon racial and gender lines as foreign outweighs the magnitude of 6 million deaths per year that are not false organizations because the majority of emissions that I stop selling risks that are not done one and see one turn produces quickly. Tech companies will pay until they can create sufficient tech that's Allison. This is an oversimplification over in 16 of it. One of the myths about low carbon transitions, high renewable costs, something going to be to money focusing on races, account for efficient energy movements, efficiency mode, energy consumption, increase, offset increase in rates, paying large premium for renewable issues over price unsustainable uncertainty is expensive, affecting business investments and consumer spending. High renewable petrol with zero fuel costs eliminate this volatility. 1 and 2 doesn't apply. Their card is about targeting individuals, not companies. It turns it's true for corporations, convictions, harms reputation, ensures department, which has massive financial implications. That's Russo. 1 and C3, 1 offshore, 1 we solve through international modeling. 2 we also criminalize import export and offshore. 3 it's way easier to switch the fuel sources than find a new country, find new places to drill, and have to compete with international suppliers. 1 and C 4 offshoring was answered above, but the plan needs Goldilocks. 1 excessive fines negates all financial benefits of fossil fuels. No reason companies will continue to use if they lose money. 2 is department prevents future government contracts with large corporations. See, that's Pellegrino and Russo. 1 and C5 U.S. is responsible for the most emissions, which has the most fossil fuel companies independently resolved modeling because the countries are waiting for U.S. action that space reducing U.S. emissions. Key to global modeling that occurs about Trump, which is our uniqueness. Podesta and 20 the U.S. relevant absent climate mitigation under Trump is not automatic U.S. resource influence expertise, not to mention enormous government influence country indispensable such actions pull the U.S. out and energy fighting climate change windows been spent a recent law policy to climate change rapidly transform the public is eager to be led other countries. It is not too late. Eco the K framework way the efforts and opportunity cost of the plan and its effects. The case is responsible for solvency uniqueness only gets links to the plan. 1 fairness, the rest is only predictable locus for offense. It means hypothetical government action freezing the F. Fiat allows the negative shift grants for offense, which unpredictable moves to all F offense. This incentivizes F research to kill substantive clash. 2 role experimentation debating consequences of particular role policy train students effectively or against climate change. This whole role experimentation gives us the necessary confidence and skills to stay corporate advance when we leave debate. That's commonly prefer our impacts. 1 experts outweigh their infinite even low probabilities because of irreversibility. Stations the floor for value is 11 fight to live another day, which is necessary for agency independently. The process of extinction to self cost billions of outside ethically indefensible and first the more for their matters that ultimately that avoidable suffering should be prevented. The affects is that on a much broader scope that burns 2 degrees of solvency. Root cause is irrelevant because corporate emissions are escalating warming now. It's only question of reducing it, refusing to assume responsibility for consequences is bad, is naughty, and simply not to have as much as ethics political agency. The world is not governed by immutable laws and set agents still process substance on ontological properties. Yield problematic effects stifle political imagination. They treat what happened on the ground as unintended consequence, collateral damage, unintended consequence, result of irresponsible political decision making strategy led to innovation of a rocketly and politically sound decision making not be based on abstract aspirations, overarching theories, or in chart. 1 AC is an impact term to the theory power. 1 corporations, absence 8 restrictions and punishments. Corporations would freely continue fossil fuel production. That's branching 2 specificity, even if the state is found climate bans are not technocratic but necessary. Pragmatic responses to warming, although the future is ceded to capitalist exploitation, environmental degradation, unemployment, food insecurity, and resource wars. That's branching 3 government intervention into corporate emissions is key. Answers are all about dwelling perfect. In 19 dialogues around climate change is place responsibility. Individual corporations get off coffee. This messaging interest in media breaded and political campaigns and corporate advertising, framing in areas while individuals up to the whole lifestyle. 100 companies are responsible for 71% global carbon emissions. To say that individual frame making changes, just nobody should be shaved for impacts. They don't make individual impacts statistically and significantly. Corporations exchange and sense involving thousands of jobs are hold hostage voting $1 comes with very little guarantees. Momentum remains scatters. Only government can hold corporate prosecutions accountable for prior focus ontology causes inaction, dehistoricizing conflict in a pragmatic approach does not begin ontology but with acting historical places in specific situation without luxury of a differing situation to found the truth we must actually do it so under sharp pressures that the fact is complete information since acting in the social world involves acting for some one social responsibility to aggravate incompleteness and knowledge. 5 turn their focus on ontology is useless for confronting the potential dangers of technology. Their detached attitude creates the worst frame for calculations or focus is key in solving specific environmental harms, avoids these turn safes and 1 find it unacceptable the absolute destruction between ontological distress and technological understanding of body distress, degradation of an ecological and social relationship, the line between opposing calcular orientation, discord, getting concerns, but nature is drawn within the comfort of affluence. The destruction of nature is not an abstract worry, but an immediate threat. We're cautioned not to rush into action, yet our decision making is mediated. It involves difficult practical choices. This still is deliberate action and consider ecological destruction, ontological and corporeal. If I choose toxicity, am I failing to fight for desire desire for control, philosophers who've been hours meditating, released from the grasp of technologies. I think not perm. Do you both either the all can overcome the actions of plan or can overcome the actions of the status quo? Perm have the USFG to the after the Asian knowledge do its action. The link debate at the top. They do not let them weigh the total sums of their impacts against authoritarian violence. Only the impacts the AF causes. Their link arguments are not unique, non-quantifiable, and either solved by the perm or not solved by the alternative. The boycott evidence. One, no link in corporations made a calculative choice in the status quo about emissions of being justified, and the AF simply removes the ability of corporations to do that way. And 20 Farm's arguments climate disruption happen simply because human activities in general, rather state corporate collusions have been for warming, sponsored by failure of government emissions and letting dirty energies profit. Two, as climate models are good, they devolve into conservative climate denial that turns all solvency loss. And in fact, climate policy suggests a good sense of privilege and knowledge based on the benefit based on peer review science, whether it's about whether it's promoted by self-political interest, and at least some effects of modernization, institutional factors, community better and scientific claims, even peer review science liable to error rigors. Is better to determine 3 warming targets are good. Heraldal 14, no co-limited issues, complex climate change would be a perfect temperature limit is a good indicator understandable to the public and be translated into quantifiable actions would be great for responsibility to limit this drop. It would be clear signal of inflation or pressure. We can efforts natural ability and emissions policy sense of adversary signal to the private sector without emission pressures. That would be a green light for continued expansion of coal and fossil fuel. Dropping the 2-degree limit would lead to match the loss of legitimacy. This evidence support the contention that has been used to avoid action limit contribute to specific discussions otherwise would have unlikely to happen. The bomb and evidence. 1, eco management is not a slippery slope to exploitation. Rich 16 environmentalists fail on need dilution hands off approach will be exploited by powerful economic groups. Should these protecting the global be necessary? Drought this slippery slope argument ignores the ability possibly to discriminate between science-based intervention and exploitation allowing for a watering drought opens up the ways of cutting these trees. The arguments is who intervenes are used for process not cautious while places relief for protection to the global extent to suggest that humans are stewardess for 2 tech progress as possible. Brick at 15 humans flourish advances at the lowest ever limits growth are so theoretical human management human humans are lacking no alcohol that's good cause catastrophic emissions are decoupling population growth down for modernization not possible substantive agrarian economy ag has a lot of reforestation use of resources speaking contradiction to infinite growth based on saturating human back in decline this century but promoting these processes humans have the opportunity to green the earth as technological challenge human radical image conception would be insufficient to pass and provide tech changes with no credible path of mitigation humans being dependent on nature to some degree tech is not an inevitable human transformation environment making for market often modernization collided with capitalism modernization is evolution of a range of modernization processes are far from complete decoupling with Christ's sustained commitment to tech progress and sort of participation in the state no eco-imperialism in fact hierarchies abiding imperialism is a critique of liberal design global environmental governance within described the critique of while as right for the ignorance but it needs to be toggled and concrete terms describing all these and equal imperialism suggests their intrinsic to political order does not seem right this politics is meant to be avoiding strategy American hegemony is a liberal cast that has been more consensual cooperative than it has been coercive the devoid evidence short cost benefit analysis encourages institutional individual action by raising the threat level and results in cooperation instead of conflict first study consensus that's development and Keating also answered by all of our arguments about the thesis utopian fear and floating peaks are bad unfair seals want to see and moves into AC's best offense anti-educational sacrifice clash and into comparison for cheap shots called to alter voting issue undermines argument and engagement by radically altering AF strategy with sacrifice and clash into comparison the all fails has no internally between redefining progress and reshaping the social especially given how resilient the techno system is about can change the activities or conditions outside the round rather just endorses their method has no praxis can't solve case this is also an impact into their framework arguments 1 it's not reverse causal even if capitalism created incentives for warming does not replacing it does not get rid of the corporate emitters who still have financial incentives to emit that's plenty and row and 2 got to work within the system time frames heat plenty and 13 all the emissions laws of Bush president of this larger paradigm time is right now dealing with climate change radical social transformation long and trying multi-generational struggle by market years mass education organizing not seen since the 60s nor any guarantee the new system also they wasted also find addicted to cold lack of history socialism in order not to time with peace social democracy Latin America beholden to powerful grassroots movement depending on petroleum radical episode not innovation of alternative society but engagement with time frame concrete term science implies these are real parameters of politics no my attention time break 15 is hard to convince people to voluntarily lose conceptual organisms have to maximize the rate of energy use the principle remains involved in general characteristics by immediate shreds distinct matters matter less a small percentage change in behavior great majority is unlikely to do so actions a few might not mitigate these hazards one out of experience the crisis has been apparent since the 70s yet not much has been actually accomplished let me grab a sip of my drink then I'll be good
Can you send a marked version with the cards you can't
yeah
read?
fair enough okay sending it out
Okay, Arnav, did you get it?
It should be set now.
Okay, then are you good?
Yeah.
First, your Alton evidence on your answer to the first turn. It says resources go into green tech, but if they fail, they are punished. I guess what evidence says that green tech development happens or is successful?
So our argument is that it would be likely that they would invest in green tech, especially this Orbison evidence we read in the 2AC says that it's energy efficient. It's more likely that they continue to pay fines and then invest in green tech during that process because they know it's the only economically sustainable model for those
I guess, can
companies.
you point me
instead
to a
of just a
line that says they
follow-over.
invest into green tech? Because the evidence you read says like they will invest, and then if they don't, they are punished. I guess what evidence says they continue to develop that?
Well,
tech
this
without being
Orvis evidence is further argues this claim. It says that efficiency measures have lowered energy consumption, offset increase in rates. Our argument is that it's really cheap and energy and cost efficient for them to invest in these green technologies. These companies understand that fossil fuels are essentially out of date and need to start investing. They're not just going to fall over. These are big multi-billion-dollar companies. They would pay their fines until they can no longer afford it, and then during that
Okay, so I
process,
have another
invest in green
question.
technologies.
On framework, you said debating the consequences of specific particular warming policies train students. I guess your 1AC Hall evidence says affirmative speculation lies in potential to open up futures that can undo and redo. It's the thing about thinking in the vicinity of the unthinkable and not being reduced to manageable certainties. I guess how is this in line with that evidence?
Well, that is describing fiat. We're imagining a future world with the
Well, not
climate
necessarily.
change,
It's
climate
saying
change.
not specific, like particular solutions. You have said your framework is debating consequences of particular solutions.
Where does this say particular solutions? It's about not being reduced to manageable certainties. Those certainties are the U.S. government not enacting the AF. That's
Okay, sure.
changed by
Also,
fiat.
from your framework interpretation, we know the consequences of this plan is good or bad. I guess how do you get to organizing from that?
So the point is that when people leave debate, they understand the negative impacts of warming, so they're more likely to do things like if
And
they
what does
become a
that do
lawyer
to
for
teach them,
so
how to organize or enable them to
So
organize?
it's less about movement building, but instead role experimentation. Our evidence gives an example of if you're a lawyer, you're more likely to challenge corporations in your proceedings because you
So your
understand the
argument is
negative
that
impacts of them.
debaters become lawyers and are able to
So
challenge
it's
these
not just
things?
I
lawyers.
think you should more clearly look to the second to last card on the 1AC advantage, the Beldman card, which talks about it influences the way we engage in grassroots
Yeah,
protests,
so
right?
if you're
After
more likely
reading
to
this
We
lobby
just
graph,
said it's not a
particular-
question of joining movements, but rather lawyers.
It's whatever we do outside of debate makes us more anti-corporation, more focused to preventing warming, so we could lobby for
Okay,
particular
sure. I have
legislation. Some people could join movements. as a
another
result of this,
question.
just-
The Zanotti evidence, its argument says we should take action prior to discussing the benefits. I guess your framework interpretation was that we should debate the consequences of the plan. I guess, how do you reconcile the two?
we should what? I don't understand why those are contradictions.
All right. 10 minutes. 6:30. Okay. I'm sending it out. It's going to be the critique, straight down to AC order.
Overview.
Nothing.
And should we leave like space at the end, or is it the whole critique in the Twin C?
We'll see how much I get to, but the intention, I'm going into it thinking I'm going to take the full critique.
Okay. Fair enough.
No guarantees.
Is there a doc? Did I miss that?
Yeah, I'm sending it out right now, sorry.
Okay.
All right. Doc should be sent now. Let me know when everyone has it. We good?
I haven't gotten that.
I still haven't gotten it.
I haven't either.
Okay. It says it sent last round. It took some time too. I'll give it a second. Should show up. It says it's there. Does anyone have it now? Ananya, do you think you can try sending it? It's in the Dropbox.
You could also try uploading it into the Discord, or not the Discord, the Zoom chat.
The issue is I use Zoom in my.
I just got it, by the way.
Oh, yeah, same. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. All right. Is anyone not ready? One for counter temptation, the one he sees an object studying the role of the negative should be disprove the scholarship produced by the object specifically intrinsic to advantage and insolvency. One limiting debate to a question between policies enforces neoliberal conceptions of politics and history. Curtis and 13. Analysis is limited debates over past policy within a given system rather than ontological engagement with the world itself. So motive information as well with all the markers of value, individuality, choice, immediacy gives rise to significant search for knowledge and democracy. The university is a major role in maintaining the cultural status quo and policing of knowledge, but also the social production of the senses. Narrative opposed history can claim rightful representation only because they're unwritten by giant economic, political, and social power that supports its stories, not because it's the truth. The world is contestable. Students are being interested in the big questions, and an important role can be played by the university that opens up space for the contestation and challenge of the world for offering up new, radically alternative ways of living, being with others. The meaningful totality we call our world suffers a variety of disruptions. It is revealed to be inadequate. The humanity surface with the loss of an established truth in a time of crisis to enable anxiety to work in the name of alternative visions, which is precisely why the humanity is under such an attack within the marketized model. The public or the university should be ensure that this anxiety questioning neoliberal post-history. 2, they've double-turned themselves. This is why I'm going for this critique. They cannot go for pragmatism to the all or win a framework argument. It also turns to as a second 2AC standard. 1AC Hall in 15, the question of how to mobilize a political response must remain a central object study. Equally important, that means is the question of why policymakers, the public, have been placed climate change at the heart. It is a mistake to think that giving students more info will lead to action. Disturbing emotions associated with climate change construct denial that discourage people from thinking about climate change in the ways that allow them to imagine or engage in actions that mitigate climate change information being actively inferred activism. The problem is to figure out how the degree of this condition by showing up a cultural trend that anybody that act requires them to do more than teach students physical science, societal implication of climate change or collective imaginers continue to founder and articulating valuable community futures. It has been registered as part of our cultural custom knowledge, not science or technical expertise, but rather imaginative capacity. Students creatively construct potential futures 50 to 100 years from now, narrating about possible futures differentiates from speculation from affirmative speculation, dominates speculative institutions, country in the future, uses current trends and measurements to extend the present forward into the future, and risk management, managing the future to maintain this current distribution power from speculation of just by concerting uncertainty that must not be reduced to manageable certainties, open up futures that cannot redo how we could exist in the present. From speculation lives by thinking in the vicinity of the unthinkable rather than by asserting that the unthinkable is an impressive principle, always thinkable, knowable, calculable, radical experimentation with the future. This is predictable. Our links are solely to the plan and justifications, which are distinct from representations, because the reasons to vote after they have chosen. You don't just vote for the plan's presentation, but rather the justifications they presented for that plan. Fairness, not unfair. We are indicting scholarship. You read that'll be below because Clash is the internal biggest internal link. After choice solves. We are quoting your evidence to factor in your defense, but only our Clash under our interpretations ethically valuable for the arguments above. 2, 3 plan focused debates destroys nuance and internal link turns your offense. Disagreement on this topic is about how we should approach the criminal justice system because everyone knows it's screwed up. Filtering the debate through a 10-second statement leaves unquestioned assumptions to make it a good idea. 4, your interpretation is words that cause the rush to the negatives to fiat utopian alternatives and structural critiques with extinction scenarios to keep up with the utopianism of the The next argument 2C 2 is the case ways extend the comps and evidence ontological understandings are prerequisite to understanding the impacts of the plan because they infect and undergird all knowledge claims and value judgments. This all requires that we presuppose basic interpretation of entities and the reality in which they interact. Fundamentally, human beings must be rational calculators in order to determine what is pleasure, what is pain, what is suffering in order for you to solve it in the context of the app. That looks like market adjustments through deterrence that produce a shift away from fossil fuels. Carbon must be something we can measure and calculate in order to create the ideal climate which is stable and safe for human existence. All of these are undergirded by the same calculative logic of Western metaphysics, makes other modes of politics illegible to our calculative modes of solvency. Demands all actions must be solved in one fell swoop. 2C 3 is the Zanati evidence. 1, this is a DA to their framework interpretation. Their interpretation was only links to the plan, so your choice is not a middle ground that understands how onto epistemologies and politics are interlinked. No, it is basically 0 criticisms because you cannot have links to anything other than the plan text. 2, consequences of their scholarship solves this card. This card is about you should care about how to mobilize politics, which is foreclosed by their interpretation. 2C 4 is the 1AC is an impact turn. 8's point is the parenti evidence. Actually, I'll extend the alternative here. It does lead to action. The Painter Moreland evidence is much better than their cards from the early 2000s that reject ontological questioning. This is an argument about implicit normativity as a motivation for engaging institutions. This is how human beings operate in their dwelling, not through abstract demands justified external institutions for rational values like calculation, which means the 1AC is counterproductive for motivating action because it doesn't speak to how individuals actually live, but assumes an impossible position of control over the government. It's important to relinquish that to force confrontation with the fundamental anxiety and powerlessness that unites all human beings. This is the only way to open a vulnerable and humble relationality, the difference of others, which brings together pluralism, correlation, and political movements towards sustainability that is tuned to difference. They read a card in the 1AC that says grassroots mobilization solves in time, which they conceded wasn't the app, so no DAs to it. Parenti evidence, it does not conclude app. It's a defense of socialism as opposed to relying on companies to use clean tech. You should understand the app is the next step with the evolution of neoliberalism that restructures the government, not transforms it, which is the 1AC card. The next argument is specificity. It's how you respond. Quickness will be impact turn per the links below, and the idea that we have to follow and solve it all in one fell swoop is exactly our whole criticism. They say government necessary individual and instead of individual ethics. It is not the alternative. It's about a collective ethics relationality that breaks the stability of a me to even search for it at an ontological level. It forces us to engage with the social within level rather than above a management that is top down, which is less politically engaging. To the prior focus card, it says, quote, we do not have the luxury of deferring decisions until we find out the truth. We have to act and must do under time pressures and in the face of incomplete information. This is how we lead to the infinite cycle of failure to solve climate change, the quick fix solutions that our whole critique is impact turning, which will be explained on the Davison evidence here. Independently, the forces you to submit to a godlike view of climate change when global carbon budgets can be managed and controlled. This is directly at odds with the possibility of vulnerability and relationality that is born out of a collective sacrifice that refuses to subscribe to the Western calculative logics of we know best. This is our whole point, that CFCs were initially thought to be environmentally friendly and put into mass production rapidly. It was only found later they were a prime contributor to ozone. After that, we shifted to HFCs, which are now both to ozone and climate change. Clean coal production blows the top off of mountains and displaces tons of people, destroying water. Every nuclear power disaster ever has been born out of an attempt to switch to more efficient fuels with incomplete information. Your ability to manage and determine an acceptable level of climate change should be make you inherently skeptical of 2C. 5 is permutation to both. All links are DAs that'll be below 2C. 6 permutation to each. 1 framework demonstrates this is ridiculous. It's about important to understand how you get there. USFG is not a unified actor, but it's a unified actor too. Now, everyone would take the easy way out, the quick fix solution, which demonstrates it does not solve 3. Vote neg on presumption. It's essentially things people do both things now, which means they have not defended a departure from the status quo. 2C. 7 white evidence doesn't mean that we should not use the calculative logics that they have given to us. Our boycott evidence says that technocratic considerations need to be abandoned, not supplemented. Any inclusion of the act means the alternative cannot generate genuine relationality or move towards vulnerability. The point isn't that the app doesn't solve climate change as they've understood it, about what they've defined climate change as. The 1AC done evidence describes this. That I explained the quote I put in cross-ex about the date of exposure, which 1AC cross-ex Ozzy defined as the effects of warming being that this ignores all, or this is our argument when climate change is measured solely through calculative logics, then the app in Paris can be viewed as a success because the targets that are set, the amount of climate change they want, it's all set at a 2-degree limit. This relies on adjusting the target so that the overall system of fossil fuel extraction stays in place. Even though we meet our targets, we only do that by shifting the coal, by shifting to other differences, which was explained above. This ignores the variety of environmental racism and violence faced by marginalized individuals as well, because it only views the warming as an existential threat. The 2C8 is climate model is good. It's about how you model, which is our criticism, which explained above. 2C9 warming targets action. This is just wrong. It delays action. People think the quick fix solution will save us all. Only understanding our powerlessness is critical to solving, which was explained above. 2C10 rich evidence about tree huggers, not us. Ours is not nothing like explained above on the interpretation on the alternative. 2C11 Brook evidence. This is just not offense. Our argument is not about rejecting technology. It's about whether it's submitted to a fantasy of human actually over the environment. The honeybee network and parallel model prove that there are indigenous ways of engaging with the technology, for example, that aren't about total control, which means it's a more ethical form of action. 2C12 imperialism wrong is wrong, which will be in the 1 in R. 2C14 drop down there. Utopian fiat explicitly not us. Will concede it. No bright line for utopian fiat. The app is far more utopian because they think they can just lead to a government policy against neoliberalism. We're less because we're more proximate. We're not floating picks, nor are we conditional. They didn't ask, and we are not defending the. We were going to go for the alternative anyway. Alternative below will be answered in the order.
Are you good for cross-lex, Arnav?
We're going to take a little prep before cross-lex. 6:30. $5.50.
Okay, you good now?
Let me just throw it in the chat and then get water, and then I'll be good.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to start on framework. What's an object of study, and can this ever include weighing the F?
You get to weigh the consequences of the scholarship you've produced. So the way that you've targeted how political mobilization occurs.
So wait. So like
it's like I promise you, if the judges just read the second framework card in the 2NC, they will auto vote neg on framework.
I actually have some questions. I have some questions about that. This re-highlighting this 1AC Hall card is just like teaching students about climate change and its societal implication is good. Why does this not involve? Why is this necessarily saying that weighing the plan is a bad idea?
All right, read the bottom of it. It says that the way you've understood scenario planning is wrong. It says there's a distinction, differentiates affirmative speculation from affirmative speculation. Dominant speculative institutions constrain the future and use current trends and measurements to extend the present forward into the future through risk management.
So that's just
managing
like
the future
trends,
to maintain the current distributions of power. This is the 1AC.
No, it's not. Like,
this is the 1AC.
Like imagining things that
the way it distinguishes that is it says affirmative speculation lives by thinking in the vicinity of the unthinkable. Every 2AC argument about how the alternative is so utopian. We could never do it.
And when
It is
did we say that the
impossible to
1AC was
understand
not
corporations
unthinkable either?
ever acceding to those things.
This is just like
It would be
this is just
impossible
like
to say that
thinking-
corporations would ever accede
whatever.
to
This
those
this
things.
is not going to go
All
anywhere.
of this
Well,
demonstrates
Arnav,
our
I have a
point
separate set
about
of
why
questions.
we need to
Arnav, I
have new
don't have that much
visions
time.
for the
I-
world
I
itself.
have other questions to ask.
Go ahead.
So, is it possible to say that corporate emissions are bad without relying on calculative rationality?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the non-quick fix solution to getting corporations to stop emitting then?
The alternative.
Explain.
So our
What
argument
does it
is
do about
that
like Exxon and
the-
Shell who's just like fuck you to like anybody who says like oil
they'll
is
say that to
bad.
anyone. That's our whole point. The idea that you can just quick fix solution out of that is our whole
This
criticism.
is just like
it
this
requires
is just
a
like a
change
you don't solve
in
argument.
how
What
we
does the alt say
orient
about it?
society towards the climate. The idea that you,
So, like,
you have
society-
to change how people orient ourselves towards
So,
that.
so like it's at the consumption level, to be clear. Like people like no longer consume.
It's not
fossil
just
fuel.
at the consumption level. It's about how do we view the climate itself? How do we view the climate crisis? Our argument is about and even if you win this stuff, it's about we've made a question about starting points. Where do we start political mobilization? You have said
Well,
that
your
we need to
political
accede
mobilization's
to
not
the
very good if
interests
it
of
can't get,
dominant
like,
interests.
Corporations to stop emitting. Like you get like a bunch of people to be like, hey, oh yeah, like climate change is bad, but like what do you do about the emissions the corporations are causing?
Because it's about starting points. Number one, it's and then that we've read a card that says, our Painter Moreland evidence says that can sort of create coalitional politics that challenge corporations as well and neoliberalism.
There's a doc. It's sent. The order is the K. Just start from the bottom of the 2 and C, and then case. Does everyone have the doc?
Oh wait, sorry, I missed the order. What is it?
K, bottom of the 2 and C, then case. Okay, is anyone not ready? On the KX and the international law link, their claims of international follower invited to a politics of international law that identifies an extremist nation that refused to follow Western norms. Spitz evidence demonstrates a link. What is he? Spitz 16. The trouble beneath the U.S. clean energy rates all them carbon polluting the developing world to cooperate in common solution within technology can be reduced our emissions so that we can contribute their funds to a global effort that will mobilize sufficient private capital and all the party pulling in the same direction towards success. And this ensures the elimination of countries that refuse to follow the norms set by the Af countries in Africa, the Philippines, and Cuba that are already struggling in the afterlife of imperialism, are scapegoated and shamed on the international realm under guise of U.S. climate leadership. That's the coal evidence. Have external impact of violent imperial intervention in foreign affairs. The U.S. sponsoring overthrew Chile's government, organizing anti-authoritarian organizations in Honduras and dropping 635,000 tons of explosives on North Korea. All prove our good. Our evidence says that it calls a regime and global surveillance. How much our poor third world countries polluting? Is it within our targets? How do we do things like economic adjustment, sanctions, etc. that create massive violence? The WTO is an indicator between the third world countries didn't get along with our global regime for the economics that were destroyed. Next to bombing evidence, bombing evidence says that the affirmative provides the basis for a violent process of ritualistic scapegoating. The intentional rivalry as defined by the Keating evidence and of course the prosecution should reject one is Keating 13. But the government that management theory holds a voting member motivated for the coming of the danger how to lead to global cooperation. New world of regime there is certain confrontation as a country that can be free research and the economy change over time conflict to being natural states that people come together but too late and is it fundamentally shaped by desire the idea to have what the others have only makes rivalry inevitable condition of positive makes ritual scapegoating inevitable because the only with that library suppresses by solidifying common humanity. Our evidence says that this applies to how we treat climate change and the app because it creates idea for common humanity to come together and maintain mastery over nature, where it's solidifying a new place. Versus demonstrative of this because it's framed as a new coming of human species versus previous rivalry and the belief that power can be suppressed via cooperation. It ignores violent tendency to gain power. There's two impacts. One, it's a link to all of our international law link arguments because all of those that do not follow the norms of great power leadership embody a threat to the common humanity established by the AF. And our critique is not the idea of common humanity, but the way they have defined that common humanity established with those who follow under a technocratic solution to warming. And two, we scope the environment drop case turns into a stage what ties its finitude, our inability to truly masterful. We also to show our ability to infinite space and in spite of ecological limits. This causes environmental destruction in its most varied forms of burning Iraqi oil fields, spread ecocidal, pesticides, and Vietnamics are all indicative of our relationship to the environment becomes intentionally violent. Next to parental evidence is one time frame key card, from 2013, and two is citing Latin American socialists who are only depending on oil revenue because the U.S. intervention link turns this, and they said, no, mind, just to be genetically hardwired, quote, we're genetically hardwired to respond to immediate threats with a fight or fight response. Well, hazards matter much less to us. It's a neoliberal myth that individualism, our entire critique is disproving the idea that each person creates their own value based on consumption. That's a neoliberal myth that sustains individuation instead of viewing ourselves as a collective. Next case. First, the Black has decided that has a massive negative externality to the affirmative pricing fossil fuel production out of existence, a terrible short-term response to climate change because it doesn't explain how they meet electricity demand of 350 million people. There simply isn't enough nuclear and renewable energy generation in the United States to fill in for fossil fuel production. I mean, the act doesn't nationalize the fossil fuel industry. It bans it. There's no positive inducement for electricity generation in the one and when I see only penalties, it's the worst possible response for protecting the rest of the nation. Despite the problem of the fossil fuel industry, the grid is still designed and maintained with fossil fuel production in mind. The act would either A, collapse the grid entirely, or B, increase people's electricity prices across the board to astronomical levels. They are doubling down on COVID and the freeze. The excess rate is directly to the burden will fall on the consumer and make electricity completely unaffordable for millions. So from 311, every state fundamental six power cards, people who thought they were buy $1,000 money away from monthly on back to the board from 30 power the faith and the summer point to bring record demand. And their answers explain how corporations develop deep research to avoid penalties, not how consumers access that technology, and the impact to compound them for Black and brown communities through exasperating poverty from COVID related expenses and unemployment, which will ensue 224. Lifting further quality to housing, the pay for energy, energy to high demand, 9,000 per megawatt. Started holding energy, the market average across the national market, frequency, color, don't play the COVID activity bills lead to power shut off for non-payment. And two, the companies aren't convicted of environmental criminalization fails us. The when see Johnson Evans, the corporations we just policing avoid penalties and prosecution means the low-level employees are the ones who are charged, not the firms or executives. It doesn't assume the app of the evidence specific to how environmental criminalization itself and to disprove the method that they take to do so. And companies are never convicted of crimes. In 2000, the protein when you're different than not considered at their time to try to dismantle and for prosecution, we impossible for the act of law. Courts interest not prosecuting corporations instead resolve them with different non-prosecution agreements where all companies does is pay a fine with the never admission of guilt, which means they can't access deterrence. And they said that deterrence is very true for country hiding of the Russo evidence disproves it with empirics and reason it fails countries with just offshore and said which are 1 and C3 and then disputed in Zato evidence. I'll do that here. Forming the issue for the rest of the debate, the AF is not presenting a piece of evidence that says environmental crimes in the US are biggest cause of climate change. There are the one modeling. I'll do the modeling here. No chance international modeling countries are trying to recover their economy. Douglas 20 under EU the code until putting a economy to different without a finance supporting climate change and developing countries simply can't afford to follow my environmental deregulation, which 14 from the growth reduction most of the country different than one to natural resource revenue economics and fundamental natural resources environmental pollution and degradation pollution. And two, criminalization was above. That's a Johnson. And three is way easier to shift fossil fuel sources find in new countries answered by the modeling evidence.
We have 757.
Do you need a marked version of the one in R? Are you good?
Stop cap 458. My Wi-Fi is being really choppy, so let me see if I can go downstairs. Give me 1 second. I'll send the doctor for that though. Okay, this should work better. Give me 1 second to get water. Okay, does everyone have the doc? Case K? Wait 1 second.
Wait, I also need a second. Okay, I'm good now. Sorry, my flow froze, but we're good.
Sorry, my parents came home. Okay. Okay, is everyone good now? Okay. Fossil fuel criminalization prevents corporations from dumping emissions as backstops tail end risks both causes 6 million deaths per year via hunger, disease, and physiological violence on racial and gender lines, and externally scales up the extinction through biodiversity loss and iClouds. The Texas argument, no link green tech is easy and cheap to switch to. Companies wouldn't just fold over. That's Alton and Arvis. There's also no uniqueness. Texas is getting black hats now because their governor loves his fossil fuel donors, and fossil fuels are worse for black and brown communities, causes hunger, disease, and pollution in communities. Yes, green tech is green tech, and it's more sustainable, cheap renewables, and jobs. SGDE in 2020, the renewables fully economic accounting of the value change with the climate electricity demand utilities focus on generating electricity by renewable sources. The climate economy has about renewables even achieve in terms of cost competitiveness and innovation to attract companies and investors. The Schultz evidence is about on the unlawful conduct standard. The app changes it to strict liability, which none of their evidence is in context of. When I see Alton says it solves a durable fuel means yes, conviction only the scope of the plan. Otherwise, anything controversial loses. Only we have evidence contextual to the mechanism of the plan. Fines work for corporations because they negate profits. Developing countries aren't emitting the cost of fossil fuels, which just go to renewables. China follows on even if they don't. Other countries solve. That's Podesta. And turning 20 shapes the bilateral relationship. UK and EU has been leaders that have together for some more than a third in the share of the China's and India's give leverage to influence Japan and New Zealand, important partners Canada and Mexico close allies. Gold standards from 2015. Recent talks disprove Keating says warming is distinct and causes cooperation because people are scared of it. The UNEP evidence is about wildlife, not emissions. We've read the evidence that stopping emissions solves warming. Douglas is only about the EU and a policy that wasn't adopted. But even if they just do it post-economic recovery, their cards are from 2020. The recovery is near because it's way better now. The K framework way, the F against an opportunity cost to the plan least must be the plan and require uniqueness versus fairness. It's a prior debate. It's only a game. They get the 2 ACS has to start over when new defenses of Rutgers put us a speech behind outweighs because it's the only valid intrinsic impact to use role experimentation debating plan enactment over warming helps us identify optimal strategy to organize against it. That's whole role experimentation is key to causing spill up outside of debate because of legal nuances. That's calling their offense. One, we impact turn any residual offense clash and turn only turns education. The only way people change their minds is through nuanced engagements and discussions. Unpredictability via their interpretation can't happen, so they call antagonism because people research how to beat their argument and conclude as false. Two, we meet it. If the off is a good idea, it justifies our scholarship. It means mobilizing them around is best. So substance-oriented framework. The critics card says nothing, just that we need to consider non-neoliberal history. We permit that because you could use that as an example for links that disprove the plan, but they don't ask us because they have not done that. The whole recutting is an AF argument. It says that purely teaching is not enough and people need to engage in constructing potential futures, i.e. debate to internalize it. The AF is also unthinkable. Come on, it's not. Their interp is not predictable. Their interpretation justifies word picks, which move the 1AC because because on underlined lines, the author's cousin, etc., are all somehow tied to scholarship. Only the resolution is predictable. The choice is not a thing that bias because of the blog. And the CJR topic plan focus is good case germane to actions, apply scholarship to material outcomes, which is all we leave the room with. It's Connolly, they get the K. It just needs to be tied to material implication. Scholarship can be a portion of that. The abolition can reconciles their topic argument. Utopian, all-inclusive, they're utopian, and the app's not utopian because we have evidence. The alternative is, if anything, the Zanoni card is at the middle ground. Argument was about permutation to both. We can disengage the state in every other instance, but we've impact her in one couple net benefits that outweigh. We just had her independent impactors. One is extinction. Death is bad. It kills everyone. It's a prerequisite to all of the alternative and value to life. But at worst, is paternalistic of them to force all minority people to death. Thompson is non-responsive because it presumes extinction is false to collective humanity. It's true in the context of extinction. It's actually everyone, so it's not a lengthy job. Then warming causes extinction too. From the F, it stops extinction, ecological genocide via warming that targets minorities worse in the process of extraction, which is just genocide of the global south. That's a length that outweighs any length. Length of the debate was unclear on the two NCs, so you should get new 2ARs. Parentheses says that we need to utilize the government in the instance of warming. That's the F. It defends policy. How the F's policy was passed is asinine for all we know pre-fiat. It was because of grassroots pressure. We didn't say that grassroots solve warming, and we don't say that grassroots solve warming and cause the F. Only the F is sufficient. The card doesn't say that. There are links. Ace of point control and mastery. The F does not attempt to regulate anything, rather stop corporations who have tried to do that. The status quo is calculative thought, but the F forces corporations to internalize their externalities via the cost of carbon emissions. Speed point is 2 degrees is good. Science is F. That's the 1AC down evidence. The 2AC hair evidence says that it's necessary to maintain pressure to reduce emissions. The alternative makes warming threats look uncredible, which greenlights coal expansion. But even if it's not true, the 2AC loss in evidence says that it's the best option to encourage action. Our evidence explicitly says targets should not be altered. So there's no need for changing them post F because there's no emissions. C point is international law. Our card says that they want to do. If they don't want to, they just don't because no one's forced you. But coercion, if it stops warming, is good because otherwise extinction. D point is bombing. We scapegoat climate change and corporations. No interventions. Those happen because of resources for drilling, which is not the case post-AF. Military runs on fossil fuels, so post-AF they can't intervene anywhere. They don't have any evidence. Where do we intervene? Why 3 is the alternative alone fails. What the hell is it? The 2NC and Northern 1NC did. 1NR did any of it. Remember 1NC cross-X. The time for starting points is over. Nor does Shell care about their reflection. Material reforms to force corporations to reduce emissions is necessary because they won't unless they're forced to, which is all of our 1IC evidence. You should draw the line on U2ARs. All of this is defense with their links to Kravaric evidence. Indicts individual actions explicitly and says that they're useless in the face of corporations and the government, as does the 2AC deficit and Heinberg evidence, which means that it's try or die, and warming outweighs the impact of any of their links.
550. Just gonna be the critique. Okay. Order is going to be just the critique. Is anyone not ready? Sorry, my dock keeps freezing. Give me one sec. What is the whole evidence should frame every argument in this debate? The assumption that debate over technocratic policy details can translate into knowledge about short-term policy making is violent and is dropped. It replicates the same logic of making human beings rational calculators for institutional reform. It says the central issue for the climate crisis is that of knowledge because of lack of imaginative capacity that moves beyond what is thinkable now, which proves they cannot win framework or a pragmatism. DA to the alt. Read this card after the round. It's game over. They do not meet it. The whole thesis of the app is that they're pragmatic. They work within the dominant institutions of the status quo. They rework the institutions. They are not the unthinkable, uncalculative logics that they've criticized, proven by our link arguments. Our counter interpretation on free markets, the one he sees in object studies, solely a question of scholarship. The app gets to weigh the benefits of the scholarship they produce, and the next should disprove the scholarship produced by the object specific intrinsic to advantage and solvency. Debate is a question of political subjectivity. The only things they get exported from debate are the ethical practices we learn to evaluate competing decisions. Policy debate only has benefits insofar as it teaches us to engage the world differently. They've dropped the Zanati evidence is from the TOC is a DA to their framework interpretation. Their interpretation is only linked to the plan, so your decision is not a middle ground that understands how epistemology interlinks with the plan, but basically zero criticisms, which is especially bad on this topic. They've dropped that on this in the CJS topic. The central question is not whether or not certain policies are good or bad, because everyone knows the criminal justice system is screwed up, but how we should epistemologically orient ourselves towards it. The abolition case, literally every negative position would be deleted from the topic. Their model also renders debate into a decentralized network of citizens, reducing debate to the parameters of whether the consequences of policies are good or bad. It's the mobilization of debaters as nodes within the structure of governance. The focus on one particularly reduces the scope of the ontological structure of the law to one of contingencies that reformulates the paradigm rather than at the level of the paradigm itself. Our Curtis evidence demonstrates alternative solvency as well. It says that starting at the level at the university can generate a political change outside of it, but only if we shift the frame through which it exists now. Now, the predictability argument is the defense. They've dropped the app choice solves their offense. Our links are solely to the plan and to justifications and cannot be to nitpicky representations. The 1ER was good at impact analysis, was terrible at establishing a link to their interpretation. They have zero justification for why ours is arbitrary or self-serving. They've dropped the plan and justifications means they cannot get infinite word picks, infinite representations, infinite words, etc., but only to those that are central to plan advantages and solvency. Fairness is mitigated by our clash offense, but even if our interpretation is slightly more unfair, you should vote negative to refuse scholarship rooted in coloniality and racialization is a dropped argument. They've dropped 100% technical contention that winning a link argument justifies a procedural violation as per our impact for framing argument, which is an explicit argument made in the 2NC that they've just dropped. Now, clash, our interpretation solves a disagreement on the topic is about how we should approach the criminal justice system, which was explained above. Filtering the debate through a 10-second statement leaves unquestioned the assumptions that make it a good idea. They've dropped that you would not just vote for the plan text alone, but the justifications presented for it too. 2AR can't go for procedural impact outweighs, which means it can't say clash turns education. When the 1AC red cards, the debate shapes subjectivity under their speculative fiction model and role playing, etc. So it matters what we clash over. And the arguments above demonstrate only ours is ethically valuable. And now drop down to the permutation, extend the Boykoff link evidence, the views that the app views climate change as something to be managed and controlled. The point isn't that the app doesn't solve climate change as they've understood a bit about what they would define climate change as when you see cross-sects. Ozzy defined the date of exposure as the, quote, effects of warming at the existential level, the ability to manage and carefully calculate the necessary amount of climate change that's acceptable under the 2-degree model is a Western calculative and managerial logic. The impact is mimetic violence. Their politics are rooted in violent human reason that creates a vicious cycle of domination in the name of a rational society. The abstract justification approach to the environment directly translates to a Western imagination that treats nature as a standing reserve for human domination. The bomb and evidence is dropped in the 1 AR. It authorizes the worst forms of mimetic violence, and they've dropped that it turns the case because it causes endless racialized conflict and environmental destruction, which is not understood under their calculative logics. Quick fixes ensure another environmental catastrophe inevitably arise. History goes definitively negative from CFCs to HFCs to clean coal production to nuclear power disasters. You should refuse a view of nature to be carefully manipulated. This means they cannot solve the F, which is why I'm not going to the case. The 1 AR had no game on turns case. It's not key to action. It delays action is a dropped argument. People think the quick fix solution will just save us all, which means they are less likely to act. Second is the international law link. The process of technocratic adjustment is wedded to a violent imperial politics of forced modeling of Western norms. Their spits evidence says, quote, we must demonstrate we can contribute funds to a global effort that will mobilize private capital, get all parties moving in the same direction towards success, unquote. This project of forced to global cooperation and coercion is the basis for countries in the global south to become targets of Western imperialism, which is proven by the conceded, by the dropped examples of WTO adjustments, North Korea anti-authoritarianism, Cuba and Chile examples. Turns in case every card they've read on the full-on debate they've read is fellow neoliberal countries, not the ones we've cited, means they can't solve either. Military would intervene. They would be in shambles without resources and would go steal it from countries in the global south. You think the U.S. hegemony would just collapse because they passed the plan? Military is not a company, so it can't be regulated by the AF and the 1 AR setup. Our shift arguments, our framework arguments prove that NAF produces an imperial subjectivity that outweighs because it's more proximate impact to debate, which means framework obfuscates util. Alternative, I'll do it here. Try or die for all is an ethos of dwelling. The question of debate is not of technocratic thinking, but ethics and orientation for a political project. That solves our policy details bad arguments on framework. The alt refuses the alt to overfocus on rational calculations. The concept of policy debate only has the agency to produce better subjects, and they've dropped our pluriversal coalition argument about how that creates an ethos of dwelling that actually creates agency to change the structures of the climate crisis.
Or 58. Okay, it's case K. Anyone not good? Cool. Okay. For next species in a row, you can see that warming is coming now and causing extinction, which means it is try or die AF, and for our model of debate, only the affirmative has a strategy to prevent global warming, which results in extinction. They've dropped sea levels and ocean acidification, kill biodiversity, and ag productivity, feedback loops, cause extinction. That's Korea. Even a small risk of an extinction impact outweighs the entire K, which will largely be answered. We'll explain on the other page. Go there now, top level, even if I don't specifically answer to in our warrant about turns case, it's all conjecture, answered by arguments about corporate emissions being key and stopping warming at the front end instead of the consumption end being necessary. To in our misses the forest for the trees. They may win that they must win that the end point of their epistemology can prevent state corporate violence. Only ours does, so we turn their offense and have external fairness and backs. To be clear, they must win. Our method is bad to win framework because even a tiny risk that our model debate makes us better at combating climate change massively outweighs imperial subjectivity. None of the two in our links have a material impact to the planet, so we win framework, they lose. Framework debate should be framed through how we access an external fairness impact and have some risk of internally turning their skills off. As framework, weigh the offers and opportunity cost to the plan. Links must be to the plan and require uniqueness. One, fairness, most important and external from all of the re-highlightings, which you can hang your hat on. Apps must generate offense via the resolution. Allowing the neg to make debate solely about discourse, subject position, epistemology, or hundreds of other things is unpredictable. Moots 8 minutes of half offense, which is a speech behind ensures the negative always wins. That outweighs. It's the only impact that can be remedied via the ballot debate. It's a competitive activity, and abandoning fairness is tautological. We say that fairness is not an impact. You have to fairly evaluate that argument, which proves outweighs. Second is role experimentation. Debating, plan, and acting helps debaters identify the optimal strategies to organize against climate change. As for the Hall evidence, Connolly substantiates this as role experimentation is necessary to prime debaters to utilize that organization against state corporate violence outside of debate, which can solve warming. Proves that substance-oriented framework, and if we win util, it is also try or die for a moral debate that trains students to combat climate change. This, the risk of our offense categorically outweighs their offense. Any risk we're right about role-playing is enough because they've dropped that spill-up is literally enough to solve warming. The tuner is blinded to the most essential 1 AR distinction. Debates focused on enactments can utilize questions of epistemology and scholarships as well. They get the scholarship K. It just needs to be tied to a material implication. It would look like your scholarship being problematic means the plan is a bad idea. This is terminal defense because it assumes the entirety of their offense and they have no answer to it. Any risk is sufficient. Now, their offense proper Hall is AF. The paragraph they've cut says purely teaching students is not sufficient, which is the reason why the next paragraph we've cut cites doing exercises like constructing potential futures is necessary, so they better internalizing because students place themselves in those settings. But we're not realistic in the sense that Hall is discussing. Obviously, corporations being fined millions of dollars is unrealistic, so it's all us for the Hall evidence. It's not a dissat. The reason why it would be is because our moral debate is not a middle ground. This is why Ozzy blew it off. Their argument proves that we are a middle ground because we include their K topic. Distinction is nonsensical. They've dropped arguments like the abolition case solved on the CGR topic. No distinction. Remember, scholarship can be paired with any K and meter interpretation. Yes, internally 2 and C, that is the basis for scholarship is 1AC cards and scholarship. That is everything. Ununderlined part of line 12. The ethicality of our scholars, of our authors, etc. All encourage nitpicks. It justifies word picks out of the plan and cards, which in the 1AC, which is infinitely regressive. The 2NR says that it excludes, but they have lack of reason why they've independently dropped the topic is the only predictable basis for preparation, and any shift away from it is unpredictable, i.e. in their insert mooting the impact of the AF is bad, hold a low threshold. They've dropped neg vibes because the block so air AF the 2NR does line by line but never extends an impact wise to moral debate and better materially do that. Did somebody say something? Okay, my bad. The alternative fails. The 2 and C nor the 1 A and R have a word on it. Only the AF can solve warming. Corporations grip onto their powers until their fingers go blue, only forcing them via criminalizing and negating process is sufficient. The frame of this is that we have a slew of evidence and they lack a single card. Direct yourself to the 1AC Pellegrino, Russo, Allison, and Parenti evidence, as well as the 2AC Davidson, Heimberg evidence. 2AC Korovic specifically indicts the individual actions of the alt and says they fails because corporations would just say fuck you. Permutations you both, we can disengage from calculated rationality in every other instance, but we've impact turned this one instance. 1AC Parenti and Rowan substantiate this perm by differentiating the EPA from their critiques of the state. Couple net benefits. One, extinction outweighs even if they win every link argument, they still lose. It's infinite even at low probabilities because of irreversibility. Extinction support value, and they've dropped that future generations matter because they're in the trillions, and anything else is ethically indefensible. You should have a low threshold because they've conceded we're all doomed absence the AF, so a 1% risk they're wrong dooms all potential value. Second, the AF, the link turn outweighs the link. Ecological genocide by a warming predominantly inflicts suffering onto black and brown populations and furthers genocide of the global south. There are enough and predicate evidence quantify this at 6 million deaths per year. Now their links are both wrong and and backward. First is control and mastery. The app does not attempt to regulate, rather stop the corporations who try to do so. The status quo is calculative, but the app forces corporations to internalize their externalities via the cost of carbon emissions. They've also dropped the 1AC and 2AC hair evidence, which link to and justify framework arguments. 2 degrees and calculations motivate action and pressure to reduce emissions. Anything else ruins credibility and leads to coal expansion, which answers their history argument. International law, our card says they want to do it. If they don't want to do it, they just don't. No one is forced to. There's no coercion, and they don't have evidence to substantiate. There's no interventions. This happened because of resources for drilling, which is not the case post-staff. Military runs in fossil fuels staff. They can't intervene anywhere. They don't have any evidence why we intervene, where we intervene, etc. So cannot turn the app. Our impacts massively outweigh, and the returns case arguments are wrong, because if we win, that 2 degrees is a good threshold. It disproves framework arguments and links. Good debate. I presume card doc.
Good debate. I'm working on the card doc. It'll be done soon.
Okay, I'll make one.
We are in. Sorry, people are about to yell, but I'm unmuted, so I didn't want that to happen. Hey, other judges are cool if I announce, right? Congrats, exceptional debate, and I've really enjoyed judging all of you. This is well deserved to be in quarters. It's a 2-1 for the AF from Chaminade.
I sat. In a nutshell, I evaluate the AF as an object of study and determine that its investment in calculative rationality and affirmative speculation makes it undesirable to endorse. I'll say this is probably the best debate I've ever judged, which checks out because I've never judged quarters of the TOC. In terms of how I started my decision, outside of reading Paul, which everyone desperately wanted to talk about, I didn't read many cards because I felt like the warrants were really fleshed out in the speeches and cross-exes in a way that I felt I didn't need to. The entire round is, framework argument, as I think people are identifying, and that seems fairly obvious from the get-go. The neg isn't saying that warming doesn't cause extinction or that strict liability definitely won't solve or any of that. So the job isn't to win. The job of the AF isn't to win the opposite of those statements. You're going to win that with the caveat that you're going to win, assuming that you get me to evaluate the round in that manner, i.e. as a hypothetical policy consequence or a consequence that I evaluate against the SCO, since the neg doesn't offer, an alternative policy action. On the impact framing on the framework debate, the AF is defending subjectivity spillover style arguments from the start, which makes this framework fairness first framing kind of tough. Like if I'm really as concerned with issues related to the environment as both teams are, then I'm going to side with the model that cultivates subjectivities in response to that. Procedural fairness is a concern insofar as some level of it is needed to literally make the game work at all, but that substantially raises the link threshold for the fairness to set, as the 2NR points out. I think the neg wins major defense to the AF standards. The 2NC and the 2NR just out debate the 1AR in it. The 2AR starts to get closer, but even then I think the neg is ahead. So the neg interprets treat the AF as an object of study and weigh the consequences of scholarship. We can critique the reps and assumptions that are intrinsic to the advantage and solvency, which makes sense to me. The 2AR pushback that there's not really a bright line is new and I don't think well warranted. It seems clear enough to me that random ununderlined words aren't intrinsic to AF solvency, but the thesis of techno management is. The 2NR is right that the 1AR is good on the impact and not the link, and that the 2AR shouldn't get to do more on the link level. So this kind of takes out a lot of the fairness offense for the AF. I think some small risk, but not really. AF choice solve user offense dropped argument coming out of the 1AR. And so I don't think the AF is winning a significant fairness argument. On role experimentation, this just kind of raises the question of the rest of the debate. It's not really insulated from the critiques that they have of the affirmative scholarship. And so it's not, a prior question that would cause me to weigh the plan. I think the neg wins major offense on their framework argument. So I'll start with the Hall evidence, which I think is making a uniqueness claim about the cultural inability to come to terms with the scale of climate change, and that the assumption that knowledge begets action is has thoroughly under-delivered. It's not obviously one way or the other, but I think the bottom of the card is leveraged effectively, and the 2NR is significantly out debating the AF on the nuance. I think the nuance here is about what unthinkable means, right? Like the AF is just like, oh, our plan would never happen. So it's unthinkable. It meets the threshold in this card. For one thing, there's tension with the framework spill of stuff in that, but I'll leave that aside. But another thing is that it's not about whether I believe your plan will happen or not. It's that the 1AC's reps of pragmatism focus on what we can concretely do. How does the alt address the issue? How do you address the 2-degree threshold, et cetera? Links to the offense that Hall is talking about, right? Like the lines that in the evidence that they read in cross-ex, this is all, I ultimately conclude that the AF is a form of affirmative speculation, which tries to get me to, quote, use current trends and measurements to extend the present forward into the future in risk management, and instead that they offer affirmative speculation, and they define that as lives by thinking the vicinity of the unthinkable, rather than by asserting that the unthinkable is in principle always thinkable, knowable, calculable. So like the concrete contingent political decision on whether strict liability would be better than the status quo, to me clearly seems to fall in the way the neg is spinning it into affirmative speculation instead of affirmative speculation. It also jives incredibly well with their own independent office, which is the calculative rationality type link arguments. To me, the IR stuff was a bit of a smokescreen strategically. It did help establish that a history of calculative rationality resulted in re-entrenching colonial power hierarchies, but it wasn't really, extended as a link to the plan given the framework arguments in the 2NR. The Boykoff evidence that the 2NR goes for on calculative rationality, I think it could be better explained both in the 2NC and the 2NR about why capitalist climate models are flawed. But to me, the neg is doing good enough work here and specifically out debating the 1AR in this question. The idea that the climate is something that simply needs to be managed at acceptable levels in order to avert an impending extinction is a kind of Western rationality that I should be suspicious of. The 2NC and 2NR give the examples of, CFCs to HFCs to clean coal to nuclear power, et cetera, which makes me on face skeptical that this Western rationality is well equipped in order to come up with the right kinds of calculations in order to address the climate crisis. And so given all these claims, thinking about the framework claims at the end of the debate, I determined that just reading the consequences of the plan bad as a scholarship K doesn't solve, because it would fall back into the kind of technocratic management that the neg is winning a critique of. So given all those stuff, all of that I resolve on framework, I ask, what are the consequences of evaluating the AF as an object of study, and should I endorse the AF given that evaluation? And I decided I shouldn't, because the AF is limiting our imagination to technocratic calculations, which we need to think beyond, and that the AF plays into the same tropes that have sustained the climate crisis. Framing climate change as something to be managed appropriately to non-existential, more productive levels is bad. And I don't want to encourage you to, roll experiment and then go out and advocate for warming, thinking about it in calculative terms that rely on Western rationality. I'd rather refuse that with a neg ballot. So that I'm about finished up. I think the app has the tools here. The offense is just not enough for me. I think our plan is good because scholars and economists have calculated that it's better than the SCO in these ways. And then calculative rationality is good because the plan's use of it is good. It's like quite circular to me. I think a robust external defense of calculative rationality, economic models, et cetera, was the easiest path to my ballot in this debate.
I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning, exceptional debate, obviously a framework debate. When the round ended, I thought I was voting neg. I think I talked myself out of it. And the reason I thought I was voting neg is because you're doing very well on defense to the F fairness offense. But I think I end up reading sort of the Hall and Zanotti stuff differently than Ani. And part of that is I think my problem with the 2NR is there's too much circularity between questions of what the AF does and sort of the link debate and questions of the evaluating the models. So I think you're winning some like ways that the AF is like in contradiction to some of their framework offense potentially, but I don't think you've sufficiently tied that to a model where I weigh the consequences. Now, and again, it's where things get circular because like arguments like winning a link justifies the procedural violation. I have no idea how to evaluate that because I have to decide framework first to decide what a link is, what the app is accountable for, etc. Right, because framework is determining what I'm weighing the link against. And so it's like, that's too circular for me. So here's the problem. I don't think your reading of the Hall evidence gets you to debating about details bad. I think that reading is a bit tenuous. And I think that's the offense that you would have needed to win my ballot. I agree that perhaps the AF isn't creating an unimaginable future. For example, it seems like the model of evaluating consequences requires us to imagine futures and not just evaluate scholarship, which accesses that offense better. Once I've decided that, the other piece that was key was some of the AF defense to links to consequences ended up making sense, especially in the context of the Zanotti evidence, which I think you're trying to link turn. And that means that sort of your answer to me, like the neg offense against consequentialism is just nowhere near strong enough. You're just kind of like the AF model prevents us from evaluating consequences properly because there's all these other factors. But I think the AF's approach of links that can spill up to materially implicate the plan, et cetera, access that consequentialism offense. So while I think there's basically terminal defense to fairness, maybe residual AF offense, I think the AF is winning the direction of the offense on the readings of the cards that you're going for. Once I've decided that, I don't think that your critique of consequentialism is strong enough to outweigh a risk that the AF solves. So warming outweighs the risk of the link. There's a ton of other pieces from the block that could have gone in different directions. I thought the use of the Curtis evidence as the alt made a ton of sense to me, but I couldn't figure out how the link in a world where they win framework, I couldn't figure out how to make that risk of the link argument outweigh a small chance of solving extinction. Again, absent different impact.
Yeah, I can go now. I want to echo what the other two judges said, which is that this was a truly fantastic debate. And I want to congratulate each and every one of you for getting to quarters of the TOC. And I struggled a lot with the fact that I know that some of you are ending your careers right now. And so I just want to say that I have gotten the opportunity to judge you and debate you many times throughout the years, and it's been a blast. And it's truly astounding to see how far you guys have come. If I don't have the chance to judge you, I just want to be able to sit out in Coppell. I've not gotten to judge you this season, but this debate was truly impressive and app-specific critique debating like better than basically any other K debate I've ever seen, especially this year. So I was just truly impressed by all of the debating. I end up deciding very similar to IGM. I probably read the Hull card in the most, like the strongest AF. There's a couple of lines in the card that sort of frame like examples. Then they're underlined, unhighlighted in the even in the rehighlighting version. But I think that they sort of frame the card and sort of better describe what the card is meaning when it says like affirmative speculation versus affirmative speculation. And I think that the card basically says that affirmative speculation, like the effect of affirmative speculation is to pin down the status quo and to enclose the future within things that are the present. And there's like lines about this in the card that talk about how, it basically says like a question of coping with climate change is affirmative speculation while preserving the status quo is affirmative speculation. And I think that this lends itself to the AF interp in the strongest manner, just because I think that, okay, I mean, I guess like the thing that I wish would have happened is I think the neg actually should have extended this utopian fiat argument that was in the block. I actually think it's incredibly smart that the way that they're getting out of this is they're saying like, LOL, the AF would never happen. It's so radical. And then in the block, you're like, well, utopian fiat only links to them. We're not defending fiat in any way, shape, or form. They can't do this, or they probably would just like lose the AF. And so I think that if that was in the 2NR, I think that this would be a lot harder for them to go for. But I do think I give them sort of the 2AR spin that this AF is like certainly not what this EV is talking about in the context of affirmative speculation. And so I think that sort of really frames the way that I view the offense and the question of whether or not pragmatism or consequentialism can be used to like create good things. I mean, this is probably me for being probably the most policy person on this panel. I don't think that there's a great, I didn't understand the answer to sort of you get Ks under your model for like the offense stuff. And so maybe it was like better than I thought it was, but I thought and I didn't think there was a great answer to the word pick stuff. I think it's a silly arg, but I don't have an answer to on the flow that's like particularly persuasive. So those are sort of the things.
Sorry, I'll just chime in. I did forget to say, I thought that a weak point of the 2NR was the no Ks under the model. It seemed more assertion-y to me. So that would have been
the 2AC framework interp said, okay, so I guess this is where I got a little confused because like you said that okay, so you said that, you know, we do not have DAs to like not weighing the plan, or we don't have a reason why to exclude the plan, something like, what was it? Detail was bad, but they said, quote, the K is responsible for solvency and uniqueness and only gets links to the plan, end quote. So why would Zanati and the Hall card, which definitely say like reps and like justifications matter, right?
I think we're disagreeing about what links to the plan mean. My understanding of what the AF says is the consequences of the plan or what justify the plan.
Yeah.
So then justifications can spill up to consequences.
Yeah, and the specific AF to AC interp, like verbatim, is weigh the AF versus an opportunity cost to the plan and effects. Like that is the
opportunity cost to the effects.
So yeah, so the way I read it was when they said like the question of the opportunity cost also was to the effects of the plan, which includes things outside of the plan text, which would be reps and things like that.
So then how does okay, sorry, Ozzy, go.
Life card in 8 minutes. I think we're gonna go, but thank you all.
Great debate, y'all. Good luck. Okay, so how does their interp solve if, like, I'm not getting how, like, so according to you, I could, like, you think this 2AC interp means that all of our links still apply because even if they're not to the action of literally passing the play.
Yeah.
Well,
I thought that I thought all of the links still applied even with this interp. Like I wasn't sure which links they were trying to exclude with their interp.
I wouldn't say they don't apply on face, or at least scholarship links don't like scholarship links to scholarship don't apply, but it has to have a consequence.
Yeah, but that being said, I think all of the links had a clear consequence. Like the reason I say this is I think that all of the links had a clear consequence to the question of implementation of the affirmative. Like the whole debate here is that if you're right about pragmatism being bad, then the AF can't solve. So there's clear implications about
how it's about how we relate to the climate crisis, right? Our argument is about like individual ethics. The whole critique was always
but I'm talking about like
the
Bauman turns case are evidence.
Well, that's an argument for why the justifications for the AF wouldn't spill up to solve, so they can't go for we meet your interp and we spill up.
If I can just throw out one thing, because I need to leave to help my team prep, but just one thing is the way that I came down on kind of this rep stuff was it wasn't separate for me. Like the framework argument, once we got to the level of role experimentation, wasn't like a procedural thing anymore. All of the negs offense and all of the AFs offense had to be resolved before I could conclude anyway on framework. And so for me, I need to first determine that this kind of calculative technocratic rationality of determining whether particular policy consequences are good is a good model for debate before I can, evaluate the absence. That's kind of how it came down on that question. That might have been different, but great debate. Yeah, it was just very enjoyable to watch.
Just packaging wise, I can envision a similar idea to what Ani just said, but starting it on, so like maybe if you had started the debate from the perspective of the link debate, talked about the consequentialism, and then maybe starting on framework, both teams spending 3 minutes, what it seemed to me on framework, made a scenario where I evaluated the link debate first more complicated to me.
Okay, but the tuner did say like the 2AR cannot just go for procedural impact because the 1AC red cards the debate shape subjectivity.
Right.
So
I didn't vote on fairness. I thought that a model where we weigh the AF is better access to Hall and Zanati.
Okay, like I guess that's the part I don't get. The Zanati card says like onto epistemologies must be incorporated with politics. How does their model?
Right. It must be incorporated through consequences.
Oh, okay.
That's what I voted on.
Okay, I understand that.
I like your 2NR link first. Curtis alt spills up, and then like answer to consequentialism, and then like slightly less frameworky. Then I'm there with you. I think.
Okay, I understand.
Curtis plus the parenti tension that you got at cross-X, I was like, it would have been done. Like, to be honest, if you had like, if you had found a way to like leverage that parenti progressive governmentality thing with their other stupid stuff that they do, I think you were like, that's the thing, you were like onto a lot of like good angles, but I thought like the parenti tension versus the Hall tension would have been way more neg for me.
All right. And then last question I had, like I guess that's right. Did you? Yeah. If you resolve framework that way, it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I had 3 hours, then I could have like figured out what I did if I resolved framework different. But I had to spend 45 minutes on framework, so I'm not quite sure about everything else. Definitely email me. I'm happy to talk about it later. And thanks
same.
for great. You gave Gabe some great rounds this year, and y'all have been really fun to judge. So well done. But
thank you, y'all.